Hey again, my genealogy queens. How is everybody doing? So, I definitely wanted to make this video on blood quantum. I've been waiting to kind of talk about this. And why I talk about blood quantum is because I feel like it's very important to understand the, I guess, stigma of the how blood quantum became a thing. And when I talk about blood quantum, I'm talking about Native American ancestry. So, blood quantum deals with how much Native American blood you have in your veins to consider yourself Native. And blood quantum was created by the Europeans to classify people as Native or not Native. And when I went to Louisiana, NOLA, and just Louisiana in general in 2019, which I missed so much. I wish I was there right now. Um, Pretty much the native woman I was speaking to was talking about how she had a granddaughter or a cousin, and she was a little girl, and she looked European. She pretty much looked just European. Like she could have been at least 1, 2, 3% native. She could have been more, but she just looked European. And the native woman, I can't remember her name, told me that she was gonna raise her to be native. I remember asking her, how, do you feel about blood quantum? Do you feel like it's legit? Do you feel like it's something that should be used, even though it was created by the Europeans? And she said, if you have if you have Native in your veins, she can't deny that. If you have Native in your veins enough to really suffice to say you're Native, you can't tell somebody they're not Native. So I agree with her definitely there. And I also agree that, if you are a good amount of native, or if you're native enough for it to not be like a trace or whatever, then you are native. Do I feel like there should be that blood quantum matters? Um, I don't really know exactly how to answer that because I feel like I'm yes and no with that question, because I feel like people shouldn't be have to amount to a percentage to say that they're native. I feel like if you have native in your veins, you know, and it shows up in a DNA test, then you're native. But if it doesn't show up, then you're not native. But I also feel like there should be a certain amount to claim native. Now with Hispanics, a lot of Hispanics really aren't that native. Like a lot of Hispanics are around 1 to 2 to 3% to 5% native. If you're over 5%, you are you're Hispanic, but you're like you're like a different Hispanic if you're like over 5% native. A lot of natives are around 5 to maybe 1 to 5 to 10% native, and 10% is even very high for a Hispanic. Now, for somebody who's just native and somebody who is just like comes from a native family and they're like 65% native, that's natural. But if you're like 0.3% native, I'm not saying that you're not native, but you're so like 0.3%, that's a trace that's so low. Like for example, um I'm 0.1% South Asian, but I'm able to trace that South Asian ancestry back to an ancestor. I know that the South Asian ancestry isn't a trace. I know that, well, it's small, but I know where it comes from. So if you're 0.3% native and you can trace that back to an ancestor, you know where it comes from, then yeah, I'm not going to deny you being native. You're 0.3%, you're native if you can trace that ancestry back. But if you can't trace the ancestry back to an ancestor, then I would say, I don't know. I just wouldn't say I'm native because I don't think that really equates to being native. If you can, and I think I said this before in a video, if you can, trace it back to an ancestor, then yeah, you're native. I mean, you have that blood there. I can trace my South Asian ancestry back to an ancestor, but if you can't do that, then there's no reason. Um, you guys already know me being Hispanic and seeing my DNA, so I'm definitely native. But Um, I don't want this video to come off as like me saying that, oh, if you're 0.1%, you're not native. I'm just saying you need to, there's a lot of people that say that they're native and they're not native. There's a lot of people that will see 0.1% and say, oh, I'm native, I'm native. But if you can't trace that DNA back to somebody, then most likely you're not native. Most likely it really just is a trace. I remember reading in on 23andMe when it said that there were that a trace region really isn't chance, it's actually something probability that you have that in your blood. But for me, I don't know. Like, I'm on the fence with that because I get it when you say that you're native even though you're a really small percentage, but you know that you have some native blood. Like, I get that and I understand that, so I don't want to say, "Oh, you're not native." But I also understand when people say, "Okay, well, blood quantum, is this blood quantum is very problematic. It's a very problematic um discussion and issue because again, it was created by colonizers and it was something that was created to separate people and divide people. A lot of Native Americans use blood quantum not because they want to, but because that's what they were taught. So it's more separation than collaboration, and I do feel like there's problems in it. Um, but there are some people who really are not native, and there are some people who just have like a very, 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 very small amount of native, and I wouldn't consider that native. You know, if you're 0.8% Native American, yeah, you're native. But if you're like 0.1% and you can't trace that back to anybody, then I wouldn't say that you're native. And that's just me. But I mean, there may be some other avenues to figuring that out. Like, I don't want anybody taking this video wrong. I don't want you guys thinking that I agree with blood quantum because I actually don't agree with blood quantum, but I can kind of see where people are going with blood quantum. I can kind of see where people are trying to make that separation because it's the same with African blood, like with people who are mixed and biracial or multiracial and stuff like that. It's like we have to make that distinction of who's really African and who's not, or who has African ancestry but is not considered just African. Like, if you're mixed, you're mixed, point blank, period. But not everybody is mixed. So if you're mixed, identify as mixed. Don't identify with just African because you don't really represent what African people are as a whole. You may represent some African aspects, but not the whole. So if that makes sense to you guys, great. If not, I don't really know the best way to explain it. But I do feel like there is a distinction that should be made, especially even with natives and everything like that. Now, when it comes to European ancestry, if you're mixed, if you're a person of color, or if you're of Asian ancestry mixed with Europeans aren't gonna see you as like one of them. Like, they're gonna see you as mixed. Point blank. Period. We already know that. That's fine. But we know that with blood quantum in general, that being created as a tool to separate or classify people into groups and put them into boxes, it's not really a good thing, and it's not very productive to do that. It kind of causes race issues. So I just feel like when it comes to blood quantum with Native American people, as Native Americans are using this to classify certain people as native and certain people as not native, um, it just can be very problematic. For example, for the Wampanoag people want you to be a certain amount of Wampanoag to be able to learn their language and learn about their culture. I think it's the same with Cherokee. And I also think that with getting scholarships to Native American schools, or even getting the Native American I think it's like it's like getting a free ride for being native. You have to be at least like 3% native. Um so that also goes into blood quantum. So blood quantum plays a big part in a lot of things, and I just want people to understand that, you know, I don't fully agree with blood. I don't agree with blood quantum. Well, I don't fully agree with blood quantum, but I feel like there are some things about blood quantum that are true, and that kind of makes sense, but there are a lot of things that don't make sense about it, because I feel like a lot, really, it brings a lot of separation. But at the same time, I feel like if you say you're 0.2% native, you're not even 1% native, but you're 0.2% native, and you say, oh my God, I'm Native American. It's kind of like, are you? So, and why I also say that is because, like, a lot of people who say that they're Native don't give back to Native communities. I feel like it's very important that if you say that you're Native, you get back to Native communities. For example, give back to the American Indian College Fund. Give back to the Navajo Institute, College Institute. With COVID right now, the Navajo have been through so much right now. They've been through so much, and like a lot of people have been getting COVID, and a lot of people have been dying from COVID in the Navajo Nation or Navajo tribe. Give back to Dive Deep, which is giving clean water to natives. Like, you gotta really put in for what you say that you are. Like, I get back to not just Native communities because I'm Native, but I get back to African communities. And with European communities, it's kind of like I can't really. I mean, I get back to European communities every day because we live in a Western civilization. So that's kind of like null and void right there. But I just feel like with Blood Quantum, there's positives and negatives to it, but there's more negatives to it than positives, because I feel like, again, it's a big line of separation. But that's really what I want to talk about with Native ancestry, because I feel like Blood Quantum is something that people really focus on, and it's something that people use as a way to distinguish who's Native and who's not. And I just don't feel like um, that should happen. I don't know. If somebody knows their family, the DNA test will tell you everything you need to know. If you take the DNA test and it tells you you're Native, and when I say Native, I mean if it tells you you're Native, if it's in a trace region, you're going to need to look up and see if you can find an ancestor that's Native. Most likely, that ancestor is far, 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 far away. If it's a trace region, most likely, unless you can find an ancestor or know of an ancestor who was Native, you're most likely not Native. It's most likely noise. But if you can find an ancestor that is Native, there's a difference to that. Okay? I hope that makes sense. If not, then I will try to fix what I say and how I say it. But I just feel like a lot of people want to claim Native but don't do the work to be Native. And that's my only problem and issue with that. And that's why I feel like Blood Quantum also plays a part, because there's some people who will even go on college scholarships and say, oh, I'm Native, but they won't do anything for being Native. They'll only say they're Native to get benefits. So there's a lot of problems also to it. So I feel like there are things that kind of make the Blood Quantum issue or Blood Quantum theory valid. So, anyways, that's all I have to say about that. And I'll see you guys later. Tell me what you think. Bye.